Hi, everybody. I'm Bob Bowman, Editor-in-Chief of Supply Chain Brain, and I welcome you to this presentation on the 4 key steps to active shipping management, second of a two-part series presented by Reveel. Now, in the last installment, Reveel's CEO, Josh Dunham, discussed how to deploy data and artificial intelligence to optimize parcel spend management. And he shared customer stories from White Labs on how technology can often be used to replace the long-term gainshare model. In this discussion, we'll share what the best shippers are doing to actively manage their shipping through planning, measuring, optimizing, and monitoring their costs. Let me take you through the agenda for today's presentation. First, we're going to introduce this 4-step process that is common practice among successful shippers. Then, we're going to discuss how to get the most value out of your carrier agreement. Finally, we'll be discussing how to ship like the big guys with smaller company resources. With that, let me introduce our speakers for today. Catherine Small is Chief of Staff at White Labs. Kat is a logistics professional with over 20 years of experience in the field. She's held her current position at White Labs for 9 years. Over the course of her tenure, she's developed expertise in logistics, product management, and IT support. Kat collaborates with cross-functional teams at White Labs' 3 locations to drive results and ensure that business operations run smoothly. Josh Dunham is CEO of Reveel. Josh co-founded the company in 2006 and is responsible for creating and advancing the company's corporate strategy. He directly oversees the technology and operations departments. Under his guidance, Reveel successfully launched the first shipping intelligence platform for parcel shippers. It is now the industry leader in machine learning technology. Prior to co-founding Reveel, Josh served in several sales roles at DHL. With that, I want to hand it over to Josh Dunham. Josh, tell us about this 4-step process that you're seeing as the best practice in the industry.
Great. Well, thank you, Bob. Kat, how are you? Good to see you.
I'm good. Good to see you too. Hope you're doing well.
Awesome. So really, with Reveel, we've had the ability to either interview, work with literally thousands of shippers. And what we've found is that the shippers that are doing kind of the best that we've seen as it relates to parcel spend management are those that aren't focused on parcel 2 or 3 times a year. It truly is something that we see them focused daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annually. There are things that they're doing on all of those timeframes. And what we've seen, though, is that when we distill down what they're doing, they're all following a pretty simple methodology. And that methodology is essentially what we're calling the 4 key steps to active shipping management. And that starts with plan, measure, optimize, and then monitor. So today, Kat and I are going to talk about each of these, and we're going to understand kind of what we see, dealing with a number of parcel shippers, hundreds of them, and then what Kat is doing specifically in regard to White Labs. So we'll kick it off, Kat, and we'll start with plan. What is it that White Labs is currently looking at for their planning currently?
We are always looking towards the future, as we all know, and every year there's new increases with the carriers. So right now we're currently planning for 2024, looking at different ways we can budget and save costs.
Nice. So what are things that you're doing kind of getting ready to go into 24? Like, how is it that you are kind of budgeting, and what's that process look like?
We're taking a looking at the whole process, from our boxes to the labor to everything to manage these increases. One way I always have my eye on is our average weight. Where is our average weight across each location as well? Sometimes in Asheville, they do things different than San Diego. We're able to catch those nuances by using Reveel's shipping platform. If my average cost dips up, I know that something's wrong with our SOPs or what have you. So that is another way we use it.
Yeah. This time of year is always a time where we hear a ton of companies kind of prepping. The carriers have announced their rate increases, and they're all trying to get their forecasts and their budgets done for next year. I'd say a couple things that we hear that's pretty standard process. is that a lot of our customers are trying to forecast their growth. So they're trying to say, okay, well, what expectation for growth do we have going into next year? And then in combination with the growth, they're really trying to factor in what is the extent or the impact of the GRI, or the general rate increase. For short, we just call it GRI, but the rate increase that the carriers, namely FedEx, UPS, have every year. So, Kat, in regard to, I guess, planning, one of the things that we talk to a lot of companies about is, how do they charge for shipping? Is that something that White Labs has to even think about, or do you just offer free shipping? Like, kind of how is it that you're thinking about charging, ultimately customers for shipping?
I wish we could offer free shipping. It's just, so for those who don't know what White Labs does, we make liquid yeast for breweries, wineries, and distilleries, and it's a very perishable product. So 90% of what I ship is next day air. So we are constantly looking and making sure that our customers are getting the best quality product available. And that's key. That's number one for us.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'd say, just from us, we have a lot of customers, some that offer free shipping, just to quote unquote offer free shipping for kind of the psychological effects of, selling a product, especially in the e-commerce space, I would say.
Yeah. One thing that we do, I forgot to tell you, Josh, is how we calculate shipping for our customers on our back end is we go based off the sales order total. Mm-hmm. So say the sales order is $100, we charge, 15-20% of that sales order total if it's next day air, or sometimes up to 27%. So that's how we do it.
Okay, got it. And then you found that's kind of the right calculation to kind of make you whole or even on the shipping.
Yeah, and especially for the back end for our CRM, it's the easiest one to do too.
Got it. That makes sense. Easy is always effective, I suppose. Yeah. I'd say a couple things that we hear a lot of companies that are looking at things in regard to average cost per shipment. So what is the average cost per shipment, and kind of factoring that into the cost of shipping. We have a lot of companies that are even kind of taking that average cost per shipment, breaking that down into like the individual service level. And that's kind of, I would say, on kind of the top or more simple way to do it. And then we have other companies that break it down into specific product groupings, and then actually have the expected cost per shipping by product groupings, and then some that just go kind of all the way down, and then they have the ability to actually charge based on the SKU.
Yeah,
and understand that.
We're starting to do by product, because we are also starting to offer dry yeast, which doesn't need to go next day air. So we're adding some more layers of complexity to our processes.
Got it. So we talked about a product group. So when you, I guess when you're kind of planning on the finance side, do you need to do any allocation of the shipping expense kind of internally?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, everything's tied to a GL account.
Okay.
Yeah, everything's tied to a GL account and gets in our CRM process that way for each customer order. It's a separate line item.
Okay. Yeah, that's very common in our experience as well, is that, there's a lot of, we provide a report for a lot of customers that's basically a pretty simple GL coding report that helps them allocate the spend that way. So,
yeah.
Great. All right. Well, why don't we move on to, let's move on to measure. So in regard to measure, one of the things that we've seen is, at least in our space, the shipping data is really tough to use, really tough to manage. And, you can't really measure what you can't see. So I would say measuring, at least from our perspective, starts with data visualization, right? And access to data. I guess tell us kind of how you're using data visualization, to kind of measure where you're at with White Labs.
Yes. So I pull reports every month. So I pull reports showing what we charge our customers, what we get charged, and the difference for each package that goes out. So every month I'm dealing with about 800 rows of data. And if anybody's pulled the FedEx or UPS reports, it's not fun. It's hard, and you need all the YouTube videos on how to teach you Excel. It's not worth your time. When you pull your reports from Reveel, you pull everything together. So your UPS, your FedEx, you want them separate, you can do them separate, FedEx, UPS. I pulled everything together, and then I start going down my list to see where we lost money and all that stuff and all that data, as well as logging in to the portal, seeing what my average weight is, what my average zone is. All that stuff is like the minute I log in, I'm able to see it and also monitor it. So if my average weight is 24 and I log in 2 weeks later and it's at 27, something's off. And having that access to that without pulling the FedEx reports, doing the calculations in the formula and taking out about 20 rows you don't need, it's huge.
Got it. Yeah, so you mentioned something that's interesting because we get asked about that a lot, and it's how can you combine carrier data sets, kind of into one report, and it's pretty difficult to do. So we get asked that a lot, is to normalize. So what we do is we provide normalized data reports to the customers, and we get asked, like I said, we get asked that a ton, so that makes a lot of sense. I would say another thing with measure is, it's important to kind of establish what KPIs or what metrics, kind of are important to your business. We, prior to building the technology, the app that we built, we conducted somewhere around 350 customer interviews. And one of the very first questions we asked our customers was, well, what's important to you? As it pertains to parcel shipping, what KPIs or what metrics do you pay attention to? And really what we heard in those interviews was, service spend is important, surcharge spend is important, average cost per shipment, what's the weight of my packages? And I know you've already talked about that one a couple of times. Our customers actually said a weight in a couple of areas. The weight is in regard to like, what's the average weight? And then also what's the impact of dimensional weight? So that one kind of has two kind of important metrics to it. Another one that came up in the interviews was minimums. And this is kind of an interesting one because a minimum is essentially a price floor, that the carrier set. So our customers are like, well, what percentage of my shipments are actually hitting this price floor? So something that they are measuring weekly. And then lastly, I would say is like average zone.
Yep.
So they're looking at zone. Apart from kind of those KPIs or metrics, anything, I guess, important to White Labs or specific to White Labs that you're measuring?
And they're always, and when I say White Labs is always like, what if we would do this or have ideas about doing that? And so what I've developed is a little mascot for Reveel. I call him Roger, because having Reveel is like having that employee in the back end who can crunch those numbers, do those reports for you. And so I'm always like, let me ask Roger. And nobody's really caught on yet to that, but I have a good time with it. And I love the reporting features in Reveel for that, is that you can get those analytics done really quick. And if you don't have the customized or the system reports, I can call your team and they can work on getting me a custom report.
Well, that's funny. Roger Reveel. I think
you guys need a little mascot.
Trademark that for you.
Yeah. Little mascot, little envelope or something like that, like in the wind.
Nice. I'd say one extension. So I'd say it's interesting on the KPIs. I think one thing that's really important that's come up in a lot of our interviews as well is our customers have said, okay, well, it's great that I can measure, the KPIs, but I don't really have a way of distinguishing whether or not I'm doing good in these areas or whether or not this KPI is good or bad. So we actually built something kind of specific, really been proprietary to our app, which lets them know representative of their kind of a cohort group. We have the ability to allow customers to see, well, how well am I doing, relative to other companies in this specific area? It kind of gives them a lot of guidance in the KPIs. Have you used that functionality at all?
I have. It's almost a driving factor for me because you have the little dashboard with the red to green, right, showing where you stand. And I'm always like, oh, I gotta get more green. So it's a driving factor that I'm like, I think it's time to renegotiate.
Got it. Well, that's good. So I think that's a perfect segue. How do we get more green? I think that brings us to the next and third step, which is optimize. Right. And so how is it, Kat, that you're kind of optimizing shipping over at White Labs?
How we're optimizing right now is, for an example, we just got new boxes in and they're amazing. They're the Cadillac of boxes, but they've also increased our average weight because not only do we ship the liquid yeast, which is pretty heavy, we also ship gel packs. We also ship lining inside of the cardboard box, which adds more DIMs to the box. And so a lot of times they're like, we have this great idea. We're gonna up there, we're gonna Cadillac of boxes. And in my back of my mind is like, I got to talk to Roger about how this is going to affect my bottom line because my DIMs are going to go up. We might be hitting our threshold for over 50 pounds because, you know, if you hit over 50 pounds, you get dinged with another charge. So that has helped us in optimizing for sure.
Interesting. Yeah, I hear that a lot is, you know, a lot of times there's, hey, we think this is a great idea and we're going to go ahead and implement it.
Yeah. Look at the cool graphics on the box. I don't care.
Right. Yeah, and it has some unintended consequences.
For sure.
So Kat, you know, you mentioned, you know, prior you and I were talking, you actually left Reveel at one point in time. And I think you kind of had an interesting story. Can you kind of tell, I guess, just tell us about that.
So White Labs has been with Reveel for 7-8 years now. Pretty much when I first started White Labs, it was gifted to me of like, this is what you're going to do, which is fun. I'm learning a ton. But after about 3 years, it was 3 years, I was like, we were supposed to renew with you guys. My money boys were like, we don't like seeing these checks go out every month. And I'm like, but this is our savings. It's not like it's not like it's costing us. This is our savings. Reveel gets a portion of that. And they're like, I mean, do you feel like you can do it on your own? We feel like you can do it on your own. I'm like, oh, okay. So we didn't renew. A new year came by with contract renegotiations. I missed a pivotal point on my FedEx contract where they slid out the money back guarantee. And I signed everything, sent it to your team just to upload for our audit purposes. And I got a call very, very shortly going, what did you just do? And it took me 6 months to get that money back guarantee back on our account. So lesson learned. Right after that, we signed back up. So the money boys.
So carrier slipped something in. You had no clue, no idea.
No idea. Neither did my sales rep. He's like, I didn't see that. I didn't even notice. I'm like, so.
Yeah, it happens.
Yeah.
So I thank you for being open about your experience because I can't tell you how many times we've heard that exact experience, and we've heard it so much that we've actually created kind of a name as well as a visual for it because it's extremely common in the parcel consulting space, and I'll bring that up now. And really what it is we call it the vicious cycle of parcel consulting. And what it is if you start at the very, very top, you know, you're a business and you're looking at your shipping and you're like, gosh, our spend is just out of control. How are we going to optimize? How are we going to get this down? And many companies hire a consultant, you know, to help them do this, which is great. Consultants are very, very effective. And the consultant does it. So as you can see in the next kind of, as you're going around the circle here, shipping costs get lowered. Now, the problem is that as a byproduct of lowering your shipping costs, the traditional compensation model in the parcel consulting space is, well, we're going to take a percentage of your spend over multiple years. Okay. And what we've heard is that during that multiple years of paying a consultant, you know, for work that they did kind of on day one, is that companies just get sick and tired of it. And in your case, the money boys come to you and say, well, gosh, how the heck do we get rid of this expense? And then therefore, the next point on this cycle is, well, you cancel the consultant. You got to get rid of the expense. So you're like, okay, well, these guys are gone. And then Kat, do it on your own, right? That's kind of the next step here is, well, when it comes to optimization, do it on your own. You learned a bunch from them. And one of the things that happens when you do it on your own is there's just, quite honestly, per your story, there's just things that you can miss, right? And the carriers are real good at margin recapture. There's things that take place every year, like the rate increase and rules change, fuel surcharges change. And there's just a lot of things. There's a lot of different variables and things just oftentimes get missed. And that brings us to the top of the circle again, which is, gosh, parcel spend is out of control. So we see that a ton. So thanks for sharing, your experience there. I would say, one of the other ways that we see businesses optimize is through carrier negotiations. How often are you focused on negotiating your carrier agreements?
I would like to do it once every 5 years. That's not how it goes. We've been doing it almost every year. It's a painful process, but we do it every year. And actually this year, in January this year, we switched after 10 years of being with FedEx. We switched to UPS, and it was based off conversations with you and your team. So it's a hard process, man. And I try to do it by myself, and it just doesn't work.
Yeah. So about once a year, you're looking at the rates. Yeah, I'd say that's pretty common. We hear, could be a year. Some companies, push it out every 3 years.
Yeah.
Kind of our take on it, I would say, is at least look at the agreement every 12 to 18 years if you're looking to optimize or have a conversation, or every 12 to 18 months.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. And even if you have signed a longer term agreement, like a 3 or even a 5-year agreement with your carrier, you can do addendums in the middle of that. So if you've got a 3-year agreement, you can look at the 12 to 18 month mark and say, okay, well, we're going to create an addendum and sharpen the pencil, in a couple of different areas there. But a couple of just real quick points, or at least things that we've kind of uncovered through the years of being, kind of on the parcel consulting and now technology side, is that 3 kind of steps I would say to keep in mind when you're negotiating with your carrier. One is you've got to know your profile. So that comes to knowing your shipping data, knowing where you spend the money. That's probably one of the most important things that we can tell you is focus on areas that you spend the money. Don't get distracted with negotiating in areas where, quite honestly, it's not just going to have that large of an impact for you. The next thing is know what to ask for. So I don't know if, in any vendor or partner negotiation, sitting down and just saying, give me your best shot, give me your best price, or give me your best rate. That's not an effective strategy. And it definitely doesn't work with the carriers either. So knowing something very, very specific. If you're going to ask for a dimensional divisor, ask for the very specific dim divisor that you're going to ask for. If you want a residential surcharge, reduction or discount, ask for a very specific discount. And then lastly, knowing how to ask. So what your carrier rep needs to do internally is essentially create a case so that they can go to their pricing analyst. And the pricing analyst is ultimately the one that approves or disapproves pricing. So if your carrier or your carrier rep can essentially take your knowledge of your data. Knowledge of your data could be, you're getting a large impact on your residential fee. So you need to negotiate that fee. And then they can take a specific request, like we need this specific discount. And they can take that to the analyst. That's the best way to get something approved. So that's kind of a little 3-step process that you can follow. Sound pretty similar to what you've done?
Yeah, it is. It's fun to see the look on their faces when they find out how well you know your data as well, right? Because they're like, oh man, this is a person who's been through the spreadsheets, who's been through the analytics, and they know their stuff. Instead of offering me 2% less on ground, which means nothing to me because we do next day air for everything. They're like, oh, look over here, 2% less on ground. I'm like, well, what about this over here, I want 2% less on next day year. And then you can see them going, oh, man, she knows her stuff. Spoiled.
Yeah, knowledge of your data is key to any negotiation. I'd say it's probably the most underutilized leverage point that businesses have with their carriers. I mean, extremely, extremely important.
It would be number one of when you're getting your ducks in a row to renegotiate, know your data. Number one.
Yeah, agreed there. All right. Well, last but certainly not least, let's jump on over to monitor. Now, when it comes to monitoring, there's a ton of things that you can monitor in your shipping. I'd say a couple of common things, at least that we hear, is our customers are asking us, well, monitor for late shipments, monitor for fraud on my account, monitor for billing errors, or am I getting charged the right rates? So those are kind of things that we get asked a lot. What are some of the things that you're monitoring at White Labs?
I am monitoring my DIMS, my average weight, and my on-time delivery. That is another thing too, that the reps, the shipping logistic reps will be like, oh, we're 95% on time, or we're 99% on time. And I can pull reports that show differently, because they're always trying to out the other guy. Well, UPS is this percentage and we're better than that. I'm like, really? Because my reports on my shipments show me this. And once again, knowledge is power, correct? And you can't control what you're not monitoring. So it's definitely something that I'm constantly looking at.
Yeah, that makes sense. We hear that a lot. We hear, our customers, it seems that you get typically, I would say in the parcel space, you get an invoice once a week. And then our customers are kind of telling us, hey, when I get the invoice, I kind of want to look at the data. I want to make sure everything kind of looks normal. So at least we know that there's this kind of weekly cadence that at least our customers are monitoring. I'd say one other area that we monitor and our customers asked us to really keep an eye on closely is during our interviews prior to building the technology, our customers came to us and they said, we're losing discounts. And we were like, well, hang on, time out. What do you mean you're losing discounts? And what we came to find out was there were two areas that we see and that customers were experiencing a loss of discounts. And that is, number one, with their revenue tier in their carrier agreements. Okay, so the way that typically carrier agreements are structured is, if you ship between a certain dollar amount, carriers will give you this discount. And then if you ship more and you happen to get into the next tier or threshold, they'll give you a bigger discount. And if you ship less and go into the tier below, you'll get less of a discount. Now, what we found was that companies were falling out of their revenue tier, and in fact, losing discounts as a result of that. So that's one thing to definitely monitor, because that number changes weekly. And it's kind of difficult to find, and it can have a major, major impact on your pricing. And then the next area that we heard was there were things that were expiring in the carrier agreements. So a lot of times what we see is the carriers will put, their carrier agreements together, and they give you certain discounts, obviously for services, and then they give you discounts for surcharges. And what we found is that in most of the agreements, the carriers will put a time limit or an expiration on, usually it's the surcharge discounts. And you got to keep a really close eye on that, because those things can expire. And at least in probably the majority of the interviews that we had, when something expired, the business, the customer did not get a knock on the door from the carrier, letting them know that it expired. Just kind of happened. And, and no one really knew about it until, they ended up finding it.
Yeah, similar experience last year. It was your team and the dashboard that showed that my surcharges with FedEx were expiring. And I reached out to my rep and he had no clue. So I'm like, yeah. So that was key. Definitely key.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Glad we caught it. It's certainly something to keep a close eye on. I would say one other thing. I'd just say, probably a quick tip. Average cost per shipment or average cost per package is probably a really good one to monitor, I would say, on a pretty consistent basis. And the reason that is because average cost per package is kind of where the rubber meets the road, right? It's kind of the culmination of a bunch of different things like, the service level that you use, that will dictate the average cost per package. The zone that you ship to will dictate the average cost per package. The weight of your shipment, the surcharges that are being utilized, all of that equates to your average cost per package. So if you're looking for something to really just monitor, whether it's weekly or maybe a little bit less frequently than that, average cost per package is probably a really easy one to pay attention to.
Yep, and that's the first thing I look at when I log into my dashboard.
Nice. Well, that's good to hear. Well, Kat, it's been great chatting to you or chatting with you about the 4 steps. So I appreciate your impact or your feedback here. And once again, kind of the methodology that we've seen used by a lot of the best parcel shippers out there is plan, measure, optimize, and monitor. And essentially that 4-step process is what we call active shipping management.
Agree.
Fantastic. It's so great to hear observations about what it's like in day-to-day basis in the trenches dealing with parcel carriers. Thanks so much, Kat, for you sharing your story, and Josh for elucidating the value of this platform. We're now going to open up to the audience for question and answers. And even as we are responding to the questions that have already been submitted, audience members are encouraged to continue to submit questions during our Q&A session, and we'll get as many of those answered as we can, time permitting. Just click on that Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. So this first question kind of bounces off of what Kat was already asked. She was asked how often she negotiates contracts. She said 1 year, would love 5, but has to do 1. This person wants to know, how often should I negotiate a new contract or evaluate additional carriers? Let's start with the negotiation of a new contract part of that first. Does everybody have to follow Kat's example and do it yearly? Kat, do you recommend others follow your lead, or is it just your situation that requires that?
It's situational. If you feel like you're in a good place with your carrier, there's no need to do it every year. I mean, I think it's a good idea just to pull your data, to look at it, to see where you can cut costs. And part of those cutting costs is always, renegotiation. So it's a good thing just to keep monitoring.
What's your experience with other customers, Josh? Yeah, I would say I really think the 12 to 18 month is a good time frame to at least look at it, right? And I get it. A lot of our customers sign longer term agreements with carriers, but the real key to that is an addendum to the agreement. So you're not trying to overhaul the agreement. You're not trying to change it. You're just trying to make a small modification. Also, Bob, I would say anytime that there's a major change, in your business, it's going to be a good time to look at negotiating to account for that major change. And Kat's, example, I think earlier, it was like, we've got new boxes, right? So maybe you need to look at negotiating a dimensional divisor at that point. Anytime there's a major change, new product, anything like that, it's going to be a good time to talk to your carrier about it. The other part of the question is, how often should I evaluate additional carriers? And I was wondering, Josh, if you could tell me if the Reveel platform helps parcel shippers diversify their carrier base and not necessarily be locked into either UPS or FedEx. Yeah, it's I would say currently when we built the app, it was focused primarily on FedEx and UPS, and that's just based on kind of the market share that those carriers have. We are in development currently, and we expect to support DHL, USPS, as well as OnTrack in Q1 of next year. So we're excited about that. So yeah, we can absolutely incorporate that data into the app, provide data visualization, and then help you evaluate whether or not those carriers would be beneficial to add to your carrier mix. Thanks very much. Kat, I was wondering now, I doubt, you don't sell directly, you don't sell yeast to consumers in stores or anything. So you're not subject to necessarily the kind of peak season shipping volumes that consumer packaged goods shippers are. And yet that does fill up the capacity pipeline in parcel. And I'm wondering, does that affect you at White Labs during peak seasons for others? And if so, what do you do about that? Do you have to deal with additional surcharges? Are you finding it's difficult to find capacity during those times? How do you scramble to deal with that, if indeed it is an issue?
It hasn't been an issue. We do business, we do B2B and B2C. So we do ship to end users. The peak seasons aren't necessarily the peak season for breweries being our biggest customer. Right. The peak season for them is like October, where they're making their Christmas beers. It's because of the length of time to make beers. So when it comes to like December and January, it's actually slow for us. And so the peak season really of FedEx and UPS doesn't really affect us.
Here's a question also for Kat. It says, prior to working with Reveel, but you didn't really have a prior to working with Reveel because you said you inherited it. But I'm wondering how your shipping costs were trending and what impact they had on the business. Is that a relevant question? Because there was a time when you weren't with Reveel. Maybe you could address that about the trend in shipping costs.
Yeah, the time we weren't with Reveel, it was not even measured, not even looked at.
Mm-hmm.
And Reveel was gifted to me from my boss, the CEO. He was like, I think this is what White Labs needs to do, and I need you to manage it. And I was like, okay.
Mm-hmm.
We had good relationships with the FedEx and UPS, but we never crunched down on the contracts like we did once we went with Reveel.
Mm-hmm. Would you also be considering carrier diversification going forward with the Reveel platform allowing for more carriers going, that you wouldn't have to be locked into one of those two?
Yeah, as long as it saves us money. Doesn't matter who it's with.
I mean, you said, well, we didn't like FedEx, so we went to UPS. And then I can imagine 6 months later, you say, we didn't like UPS, so we went to FedEx. I'm sure you would like a little bit broader choices if you have, if at all.
Yeah, you got to play the games.
Now, when they told you, when you inherited, this is a question asking, when you inherited Reveel, do you have a sense of why the company picked it in the first place? Why it was given to you as a way to go from day one?
My boss read a newspaper article on how there is companies out there that do this, where they can help you negotiate and help you with your audits and the money back guarantee. And I had no idea. He didn't even know either. So he's like, I think we need to do this. And so we started talking with Reveel. We didn't talk to anybody else because we were sold.
Interesting. Can shippers use the technology to negotiate on their own? Josh, do you think, is that a yes?
That is, yeah. And that's arguably one of the largest changes that we've made to our business over the last 3 or 4 years. And it really is, that decision was made as a result of that vicious cycle that we talked about and Kat experienced firsthand, where consultants, quite honestly, cost a ton of money, and businesses don't want to pay a ton of money over a 3-year period for work that a consultant did on day one. So what our customers asked us to do is to create the ability for them to approach the carriers on their own and leverage the technology for the data and the visualization of new carrier agreements so that they can negotiate on their own. And that's exactly what we've done, is we've just empowered our customer to really go to the carriers without having to use us if they choose not to.
It's a really powerful tool either way. I guess this question's for Josh. What can we expect the actual impact of the 2024 GRI to be?
Yeah, so the carriers announced 5.9%. We're expecting, once we get the final numbers in there, we're still running some modeling on our part. We're expecting somewhere like that actual impact, because one thing I should say, when the carriers announce like something like 5.9%, they're taking an average, right? So that's not necessarily this is exactly what your increase will be. And the other thing that they don't take into consideration in that address, which is really important to note, is the surcharges are just excluded at all from that number. Okay. So they can increase surcharges by 20% and not include them in that average. So what we do every year is we actually run the numbers over the data set to see what the actual impact is of the increase. And we're expecting it to be somewhere between 8.5% to 10%, depending on the carrier and depending on the customer. But 8.5% to 10% average will be the impact this year.
Are surges more of an issue now? Are surcharges more of an issue now than they were before? There's some surprises up the sleeves of the parcel carriers that weren't there before. I'm thinking for specifically of so-called demand surcharges that are coming down during peak surge. Is that an issue now, Josh? It needs to be better monitored.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge issue. Surcharges represent, really depending on the customer. I mean, it could be, on average, we see somewhere between the 18 to 25% of your spend range. We have some customers where surcharge is actually more than the transportation charge. If you're getting hit with a lot of things like oversize and things like that, But the demand charges, yeah, they're absolutely something you have to focus on. Not only do you have to forecast for to understand the impact, so that you're not caught off guard, but you've got to also understand, and this is really, really important if you're looking at negotiating and talking to your carrier rep, the demand surcharges are classified differently in the carrier agreements. So just because you have a discount on a certain surcharge, it doesn't mean that you have a discount on that same surcharge under the demand classification of that surcharge. So you have to negotiate that separately. Very, very important distinction.
That is a very valuable tip. Kat, have you faced this yourself, and have you used the Reveel platform to kind of smoke out these hidden issues?
One of the issues with surcharges I found out is my team was paying some bills late, and I didn't notice them because I get my Excel spreadsheets showing customer data, not necessarily our data. And there's a little wheel that shows you on the Reveel app what percentage is your surcharges, what it goes to. Like gas is like a huge chunk, right? And I had a pretty big chunk on late charge fee. Didn't know until I logged in. So
now that's one of those things that potentially should be avoided. You have the power to avoid those if you're watching.
It is avoided now.
Which again is why a platform like this is so essential. The question wants to know, what is the average annual parcel spend of Reveel's customers? Josh?
Yeah, I mean, average is tough because we have customers kind of all over the map. I would say our typical customer that we engage with is going to be over $1 million in spend. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't have engagements that have been below that, but we certainly have. But I would say a really good focus area for us has been kind of that $1 or $2 million in spend to $30 million. But then again, we also have shippers that ship much larger than $30 million a year.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's been quite an education for me to see how the world of parcel management really works out there in the trenches. And Kat, that was a great hearing about your experience. And Josh, great hearing from you about how Reveel's shipping intelligence platform can be of real help there. Unfortunately, we are just about out of time. We have time for one final question. I'm going to direct it to both of you, starting with Kat. Here it is. How can any organization, no matter the size, implement this process without heavy investment of time and resources?
You got to execute. You got to do something. I think people get very overwhelmed when it comes to the shipping and the shipping analytics, and your carrier is telling you what they think you need to hear, and that's also confusing too. So the first step is take action, do something, execute. Reveel has amazing people. They know the ins and the outs and the Greek of those contracts. So it's having somebody by your side directing you and helping you is huge.
Yeah, great. Josh, what's your view on that?
That's a similar. I mean, if you're trying to limit, your exposure from a time and personnel perspective, really the only way you can do that is through the platform itself. So when we think platform, we think the technology and the people. It's kind of a combination of those two things. And technology is really, really effective in disrupting because it empowers the individual, right? It empowers the person. And that's really the only way that you can do it without a heavy lift is to rely on technology.
Once again, I really want to thank Catherine Small of White Labs and Josh Dunham of Reveel to tell us all about how parcel spend management and parcel shipping management can be improved with the help of this shipping intelligence platform. Thank you so much. And thank you, audience, for your participation and your excellent questions as well. And don't forget, you can still watch part 1 of this series. It's called Is Parcel Consulting Dead? We heard some really interesting observations today from Josh about the pitfalls of parcel consulting. You'll learn more about that if you listen to the first episode. You'll get a link to that in the follow-up email for all attendees. Finally, be sure and sign up now for the Reveel platform. You can learn how organizations can implement this process efficiently, regardless of size. There's a link right there, but that link also will be provided to all attendees in a follow-up email after the conclusion of this session. Once again, everybody, thank you so much. I really appreciate everyone's observations, and everybody, have a great day.